Hello and good morning, everyone. OnlyPositivity here. I have my coffee with me, ready to kick off podcast number 31 on this playlist that I'm looking to launch called Elevated Thoughts. So, before diving into the book and everything for today, let's go ahead and start with the level set. So, as I endeavor upon pursuing knowledge and life experience in this next phase of life through fitness, photography, traveling, and much more, one habit that I've really formed is reading. So this podcast essentially goes through some of the books I've been reading as of late, taking those lessons learned and applying them to experiences in my life. So once again, before diving into the book and everything for today, let's start with a story. So today's story is not really a story in the traditional sense from the way I have been doing them, like something funny or something related to life or a life lesson. I'm just coming off a great weekend. I celebrated the wedding of one of my best friends, and I'm still kind of riding that wave. We had a whole weekend of events, and due to the COVID-19 protocols and everything like that, the wedding was a lot smaller. So it was just the close friends and family, and then the bridal party. But throughout the weekend, because of the way it was set up, everything was intimate. The wedding took place in my buddy's backyard, and there was just positive vibes, love all around, just genuine happiness. I got to spend a lot of time with the people I love most, and I don't know if you guys have ever felt this type of experience, but coming off such a great weekend, it makes you realize all the people that you do care about, all the people that you would put around you for a good function like this. And we had an awesome time with the boys. We turned up a little bit, had a few drinks. It was just a blast, and a lot of laughs. We were up late. The guys crashed at my place for a couple of nights, and we were just up late talking, catching up on life. And it's good to just pause and do things like that every now and then with your closest friends, right? Because life can definitely pass us by. We can forget to cherish those little moments. And I'm definitely on riding this emotional wave right now. But just a beautiful wedding. My buddy's now wife is an amazing girl, and I'm looking forward to spending more time with them now that they're married, and just really excited. So all in all, just a lot of bullshit, right? We're just messing around all weekend long, laughing, roasting each other, goofing off, jumping around on the dance floor, and I just couldn't ask for more from a weekend. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. So coming back to the book for today. For over the past two podcasts, I've been bringing on a couple folks and just testing out those waters and seeing how that's going to go. And I've honestly had a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to doing more of that. But I can't forget some of these good habits that I've been forming, and we're talking about reading here. So we're going to go through part two of the history book by Big Ideas Simply Explained. So, one thing that really stuck out to me about this book is that there's definite themes throughout history. There's different eras and different technology associated with those eras, climate as well, politics, and all these things tend to evolve over time. But one thing you see is a similar chain of events, and to put it into a simpler version, it goes like this. A leader comes to light, some prosperity occurs to the people, and that person governs for a short period of time or for centuries, right? Or for an extended period of time. But at some point, corruption, revolution, unease, greed, violence, all these things are going to cause some inner turmoil in a country or a group of people. And the bubble is going to explode. People are going to revolt. There's going to be an assassination, something along those lines. And the cycle almost starts all over again. But like I said, one thing that continues to happen is that as society becomes more civilized and population expands, the world has had to catch up, right? The world has had to evolve, and we've had to adjust as the world becomes more populous. So last week we talked about Paleolithic culture, with cave art and things like that with Neanderthals, and the earliest human species. But today we're going to talk about ancient civilizations. And so the time period we're going to go through is 6000 BCE to 500 BCE. So around 5,000 years ago, the first humans started to form civilized societies. And as you can imagine, the driving factor behind these societies was the progress in agriculture, right? Going from hunter-gatherer cultures where people had to really fend for themselves and go get every meal, right? They had to go hunt, they had to cut up their food, they had to cook it. I'm not exactly sure what went on during that time, but they were in a constant struggle to attain sustenance for their lives and for their families. So naturally, as time goes on, people are going to look to not automate, but make that process a little easier. And that's where agriculture comes into the mix. So, this establishment of societies really brings out a stride in human life, right? People are thinking critically how to make things easier, how to streamline. And that's been a trait of humans throughout time. People are going to always look to make those day-to-day administrative tasks a little bit easier so they can focus on things that they want to do. So what that does, though, is it does create inequalities and it creates power struggles, right? So when you talk about a civilization, who's going to run it? What actions are going to be taken? Who's going to make the call, right? So what's going to be prioritized? Things like that. So all of these things, as early civilizations form, they're not only expanding their mental capacity to work through those types of thoughts. They're also experiencing it for the very first time, and there's no book to go off of, right? So it's hard for me to personally throw in, oh, hey, maybe you shouldn't have done it that way, because what was there before to go off of, right? So that's the onset, right? So going to the first story for today is the temples of Abu Simbel from 1264 BCE, and we're talking about Ramses II in Pharaonic Egypt, right? The time of the pharaohs. So, and one of the main reasons I picked this story is because, and my boys will attest to this, we are all in love with the Prince of Egypt, right? That cartoon movie. It was on Netflix for a little bit, but I had it on DVD even growing up as a kid, right? I had no idea that it was it had any kind of religious connotation. I just really love the theatrics of it, the songs in it, obviously. So, I grew up Indian. Bollywood has songs all over the place. So this movie, Prince of Egypt, was very familiar to me, right? So we still sing those songs impromptu at any moment, right, when we're with the guys. So anyway, aside, so we're talking about Ramses II, okay? So he had two huge temples built on the west bank of the Nile in southern Egypt. And there's 4 statues in the front of this temple. And there's 4 statues of the pharaoh in front of the temple. Each of them were seated on a throne, wearing symbols of their divine rule. Now, they have the cap, the gold chain, the rings. They don't go into the specifics, but I'm assuming it was something along those lines. It's mainly the crown, right? So the whole thing about this is those symbols really signify that those pharaohs were selected by God, Ramses II included, right? They were selected by God to rule over Egypt. And the crown signifies the control of Upper and Lower Egypt. So, this was a time where, the bigger, the better, the bigger, the more powerful. So these temples are constructed to symbolize power. They're constructed to symbolize accomplishments and ambitions. And that's where we would see, hieroglyphs on the wall outlining all of the things that a pharaoh would have accomplished in their lives. And there's total differences amongst the pharaohs in the way they prioritized their reign and activities. And that's captured, right, through the way their monuments were built. So the tradition of these monuments and these temples with these depictions of these big rulers and their life stories, these symbols, was actually a tradition that wasn't new to Ramses II. It had gone around for about 2,000 years prior to Ramses II, starting with King Narmer, the book says. Okay, so the King Narmer was the first to unify Upper and Lower Egypt. So a weird concept here, right? Because Upper Egypt is actually southern Egypt, and Lower Egypt is actually northern Egypt, where in the United States, upper is south, upper is north, and lower is south. But in Egypt, it's reversed. But it's all good, right? Just a side note. So, like I said, King Narmer was the first to kind of make these traditions of making monuments, and he had his accomplishments written on a stone pallet. So, in the temple where this pallet was found, Narmer is depicted, and he's seen holding an enemy by the hair, quote unquote, ready to smite him. So, what's surprising about that is they were really okay with depictions of them being violent and destroying those who oppose them, right? Nowadays you don't really want to be seen as a violent ruler, right? Violence is frowned upon. So, to me, that seems like there must have been a real lack of emotional intelligence back in the day, right? Everyone's experiencing these new things for the first time. So I'm sure there's a lot of, combative activity and things that lacked a lot of logical reasoning. So Ramses was also depicted in the same exact way with, military might and this godlike strength. And pharaohs were also depicted as being a lot bigger in size, so quote unquote godlike, than the other human beings, right? You would see a pharaoh who's like 30 feet tall and a regular person, right, between 5 to 6 feet tall. So there wasn't any type of advanced science around this time or any scientific methods. So the pharaoh is really seen as someone who could control the order of the cosmos and predict outcomes and things like that. So, one example of it is there's an annual flooding of the Nile, and that would be very crucial to the neighboring areas. It provided fertilizer, replenished the soil for the harvest, and the pharaoh was said to have been able to control that, which is probably not true, right? So, going forward, they separated this time period into two periods, and kind of like two and a half, but we'll go into that. So the first is obviously the Old Kingdom. So this is where like a pharaoh's success was basically commemorated, or a view into the pharaoh's success was how elaborate and how many monuments they had built during their existence, right? To me, that's a very old school way to be, right? I talk about legacy a lot, right? It seems like the pharaoh's legacy was, okay, how many monuments can I leave behind so that people remember me? Who's going to talk about me? Great goal, right? Great goal. I'm not going to knock it by any means. But, like me and my buddy were talking about in my previous podcast, on my first guest podcast, like kind of what does it matter if someone remembers you or not, really? And I'm getting deep, right? But, I personally feel like if we're all just doing good things in life, right? We're helping people. We're not trying to create a negative impact in this world. That should be enough, right? We'll be remembered maybe, but maybe not. I don't know if that's the goal or not, but hey, that's just my thoughts. I'm just putting it out there. So we talk about the Egyptian gods. So they obviously had by the power of Ra, right? That's like was always said in the Prince of Egypt. I'm not trying to be ignorant, but Ra was a sun god. They had Osiris, which was the god of the dead. Ptah, which was the creator. So a very interesting set of gods, right? And we don't really see it as much anymore. I don't know why I said that. We don't really see it as much anymore, right? And it was wiped out, and we'll talk about that a little bit. But to me, that's pretty interesting, right? That's pretty interesting that they were just completely wiped off the grid, and there's not too many fragments or too many people who do still believe in the Ra and Osiris and things like that. I'm not sure why. I'll do a little bit more digging, but interesting, right? So we move forward to the New Kingdom. So after the Old Kingdom, a lot of families from Thebes ruled over Egypt, and this god named Amon, Amon, or Amen, became the main deity of the Egyptian religion. So the Old Kingdom collapses in the 23rd century, and they don't really say how this happened or why, right? So we'll see this often, right? And I'm not sure if they collapsed in the 23rd century or the 3rd century. I might have written that down wrong, but anyway. So they don't say why this happened, okay? So we'll see this with other stories, and we know. So what we do know is that Moses and Ramses, the first, were in this epic battle to free the Hebrews, and it seems to me like the Egyptians died out after that. But there's not too much evidence as to why they died out or how. But what I'm thinking is, a religion like Christianity was really able to survive for thousands of years. And granted, they had some different type of infrastructure. They went about it a different way. And the Egyptian religion died out. And I wonder why that is. So the book goes forward and they say, hey, look, there was a middle kingdom between the new and the old kingdom where a group called the Hyskos, Hyskos, ruled. And they came to power. They were Semites from Syria, and they were actually expelled from Egypt after some time. But by this time, when the new kingdom came around, immortality was said to be available, not only to the pharaohs, right? Because it was originally only exclusive to pharaohs, but it's exclusive. It's inclusive of priests, scribes, and other people who could afford the offerings, right? So that's an interesting one, right? Kind of paying your way to salvation, or being able to pay for offerings and for mummification as well. So we'll see that with a lot of the other Abrahamic faiths as time goes on. And like I said, even with Martin Luther and the 95 Thesis, right? One of his main issues was like, hey, dude, people can pay for salvation. And ultimately, the popes and whatnot were seeking funding for like the Basilica and the Vatican and things like that. So we'll get into that in religion as we go forward with these stories and these books, because religion is one thing that's very, very, very interesting to me, and belief systems and things like that. So we'll dive into it. So, like I said, in the New Kingdom, salvation was available to everyone for the most part. Anyone could afford it. So now we come back to Ramses II in the New Kingdom. And this is where, Egyptian control actually extended as far as the Euphrates River in Asia. So they had a pretty large reign in that, was it Northern Africa, European region. But somehow, right? Somehow they were wiped out. Somehow they lost their power. And that opened the way, that paved the way for new religions, new cultures, new explorers to come in and really take it from where they left off. So, we'll leave it there. That was Ramesses II and the temples at Abu Simbel. I would highly recommend you guys Google some pictures on that stuff, because the statues are beautiful, right? To this day, they've lasted, and they're epic. They're stoic. I haven't been there, but I want to go there. I plan to go there, and hopefully I can take some pictures and share that with you guys as well. So we move on from that, and we move to the Persian Wars from 490 to 449 BCE, and we talk about the Persian Empire. So, the book often starts with a very dramatic picture, and I think that's a good attention grabber, right? So, talking about Leonidas of Sparta, right? So he stands with his 300 most elite soldiers in front of the vast Persian army. And at the time, it was the largest army in the world. The Persian army says, lay down your weapons. And Leonidas responds, come and get them, right? And we hear in the movie 300, our arrows will blot out the sun. So essentially what he's saying is like, there's going to be so many arrows coming your way, it's going to be dark because we're going to blot out the sun. Now, I personally love that movie, 300. It's so dramatic, so epic. And I've probably seen it over 30 times, and which is why I chose to kind of dive into the story. And, when you watch movies, you definitely can't take the depictions as literal, because they over dramatize for the viewers. So I wanted to learn some more about the historical points behind like that iconic movie, right? So the Persian War lasted a decade, okay? And it was really the large empire, which was the Persian Empire, and they were pitted against, or they were fighting against individual city-states in southern Greece. Now, these Greek city-states could not get it together. They couldn't unify, right? And essentially, Persia was going through trying to pick them off one by one, right? And that's a good tactic, right? Together, they are definitely stronger. They have superior fighting power and everything like that. But, what's interesting about this is that the focus of these movies in history has always been on the Greek states, right? It's always been coming from the Greek states, Sparta, Athens, whatever, right? But the Persian Empire, with everything that it had, all of its resources, has generally been ignored and neglected throughout time. And, at the time of the Persian Wars, it was probably the most advanced civilization in the world. And that's a theme of a lot of the Islamic empires, right? They're advanced and they accept other cultures, throughout time. You'll see that in Persia, whenever they took someone over, they didn't really force them to convert or anything like that. They had to submit to, the ruler, but they could keep their culture, they could keep their religion and practice it openly, to be honest. And to me, that's kind of how you funnel new ideas through, right? So, we'll get into that deeper. But this empire, they call themselves the Achaemenids, like Achaemenids. So Achaemenids. I guess I'll pronounce it like that. So, at its peak, at the peak of this empire, they probably ruled half of the world's population, which is incredible, right? So the empire starts with Cyrus the Great. He overthrows King Medes, and he conquers Babylonia and Lydia, which is modern day Turkey. So Cyrus has a couple successors, Cambyses II and Darius, and they expand the empire even further into Egypt and the Balkans. They take over Thrace, they take over Macedonia, and they have a base in Europe now. Okay, so like I said, the Achaemenids, they allowed everyone to keep their religions, their culture, and their language. Okay, so now in the movie 300, and a lot of media and movies associated with the Middle East is seen kind of in a negative light, right? The Middle East is seen as the aggressor, the antagonist, evil, but it may not have been that way. So what I'm gonna say, like, people shouldn't be taking other people over, right? So they shouldn't be going in and asking people to submit to them. Just live your life, let you do your thing, right? But I'm thinking about Marco Polo and the Mongols, and I believe the Mongols were like an Islamic faith group, and what they would do is they would take the best parts from other cultures, right? They would take over monasteries, they would take over merchant ships and things like that. But they brought together the best of the best, and Kublai Khan honestly had an advising committee of people that were not only Mongols. Actually, they were mainly non-Mongols. So my thought with that is never be the smartest person in the room, right? Things like that. He probably had a solid board of advisors who were well versed in the different ways of the world. So anyway, coming back to the Persian Empire. So the Persian Empire invested in infrastructure. So the Persian Empire was the first time that the whole Middle East was united under one empire or one umbrella. But what I think they underestimated was the resiliency of the Greeks, right? So we go forward. So Darius' son, right? So it goes, I think it was Cyrus, Cambyses, and then Darius. And Darius has a son, Xerxes, who comes to power. And that's what the movie's about, right? Xerxes and Leonidas. And Xerxes starts to expand on his father's expansion plan, right? So he creates this like incredibly vast army, right? And he embarks. So the main source of information, I think it's important to note this, the main source of information that we have on the Persian Wars are from a Greek historian named Herodotus. So Herodotus is nicknamed the father of history, but he is also nicknamed the father of lies. So for those of you that have seen 300, right, at the end of the movie, Leonidas sends one of his guys, because he knows he's going to die, to tell their story, right? He says, hey, tell them what happened at Thermopylae today, and make sure it's carried on to all the Greeks, let them unite and whatnot, right? So Herodotus, the actual scripture or the text, says that Xerxes' land army had about 1.7 million troops estimated. But modern historians will say that it was probably closer to 200,000. Now, who knows if there were even 1.7 million people on the earth at that time? So modern historians say closer to 200,000, which, dude, I'm telling you, it's still a lot compared to 300 men. So, no, not taking anything away there, but it's definitely not a million, because I definitely don't think those 300 people could have lasted against 1.7 million people. But hey, what do I know? So, like I said, at the end of the movie, Leonidas tells one of his men to go, tell my story. So we go forward to the second invasion. Okay, so the Persian second invasion, that was the one that was halted by Leonidas and his 300 men. But he also had assistance from the Greek naval resistance. So it wasn't just him, according to the book. He also had some ships on his side. There was also a string of battles that Xerxes lost, right? And so he goes back to Persia. He retreats. And they attribute the loss to the fact that Xerxes couldn't keep his army supplied, okay? And maybe also to the Greeks' superior fighting skill. So, right, if he has hundreds of thousands of men, how is he going to feed them every day? Everyone's got to eat, right? So the Greeks go forward, and they absolutely crush the Persians at the Battle of Plataea. And this is probably what the end of 300 was referring to, like when they gather the whole Greek army versus the Persians, and they just wipe them out. So what needs to happen was there needs to be a direct threat on the king's life in order for the Greek army to be engaged, right? And that was Leonidas' whole thing for taking his 300 men, saying he's going for a walk. I need my 300 men to come with me, right? So, there's that. But, after this defeat at Plataea, the Greeks, they go on the offensive. And in 449 BCE, the Persians, want a peace treaty. And they give all the Greek states their independence, and they go back. They go back home. They take a few L's, and they don't want to play anymore, right? So Persian expansion stops. So at that point, the Persian Empire still goes on to thrive for more than a century, until Alexander the Great comes in 331 BCE and takes him over. So that's the story of the Persian Wars. But let's spend a minute on Cyrus the Great, right? So Cyrus the Great won the Persian army's allegiance one day with a superpower move, okay? So one day he makes them clear thorn bushes all day long, right? And they're in the heat. They're probably getting cut up. Makes them clear it all day long. The next day, he says, "All right, I'm gonna throw you a banquet, food, drink, whatever you want." And then he says to them, "Why would you remain slaves to the Medes?" Right? We know Cyrus threw over King Medes, when you could live in luxury, right? So he says, why would you work for this guy? When you come live with me, we'll have banquets, and it'll be a good time, right? So super hard flex, man. Like, not literal at all, just went forward and went through the gestures, okay? But, going forward, he also liberates the Jews from the holds that the Babylonians had on them, and he lets them rebuild their temples in Jerusalem. So we hear some good news coming there, right? We hear some positive vibes, some people being tolerant, some leaders being tolerant. So, it makes me question if the depictions are truly accurate. But I get it in movies and things like that. But it's always good to fact check, right? Always good to read and find out the true stories behind things as history describes it. So, like I said, the Persians always allowed others to practice their religion, their language, and things of that sort. So some good notes there and some good history there as well. So we'll hop off the Persian Wars there, and we'll jump into our last story for the day, which is the Battle of the Milvian Bridge in 312 BCE, and that's Constantine, the rise of Christianity. Okay, so this is an interesting story for me. So we talk about October 312 BCE. So Emperor Constantine was posted at the Milvian Bridge near Rome, and he was waiting to fight his rival, Maxentius, for control of the western part of the Roman Empire, because at the time it was split into east and west. And each component or each wing of the Roman Empire was ruled by an emperor and a deputy. So the literature says that days before the battle, Constantine has this crazy vision of a flaming cross, and it says, "In hoc signo vinces," and that means in Latin, "by this sign conquer." That is super fishy to me, right? Like, you had a revelation, you had a dream, and you just went ahead and, justified killing based on that dream you had. I'm not going to say that you didn't have it, but, I don't know. You can't go kill people because of a dream, in my opinion, I guess. I don't know. Definitely other ways around it. But like I'm saying, we're talking about history. So that was one of the main ways people knew how to resolve disputes back then, was go to war. So anyway, that dream convinced him that he had the Christian God behind his back. So he goes on. He defeats Maxentius, right? He defeats, for I believe, the Western rule of the Roman Empire. But going forward, Constantine's getting wild. He says, Apollo came to me in an earlier vision. And, it just looks like he was looking for some spiritual backing behind his conquest, right? Looking for that divine support so he could be the sole emperor of the Roman Empire, okay? So, we come to Christianity for a second. So for about 300 years after Jesus Christ died, Christianity was just a small sect within the Roman Empire. And they were persecuted, and there was other religions that were developing as a result of social, political changes, economic conditions. So Constantine becomes the sole emperor in 324 BCE, and then he uses Christianity as a uniting force throughout the empire, okay? So he founds the city, Constantinople, and he allows only Christian churches to be built. And it's the opposite of Persia, right? Opposite of the Persian rule, where, they didn't allow other religions to thrive. The people who had higher status in society were really looking to get with Constantine and move up the political ladder. So many of them converted over to Christianity. And that's interesting to me too, right? Converting a religion to climb the ladder, which I don't know. I wouldn't do that. But, you never know. We're all out here struggling to survive, I guess, So going forward, as Christianity comes into play, there's a lot of branches, a lot of sects of Christianity developing as well. So Constantine doesn't like this. He doesn't want people to be on different pages. You need to be on the same page as me. I'm Constantine, I guess. So he pulls together a conference, and he settles that dispute of which god to follow or whatever, or what sect to follow. And then he goes, if Jesus Christ was of the same substance as God, then we're all under one umbrella, right? So there were some questions whether, if Jesus Christ was someone to follow or not. Here he squashes it. Jesus Christ is the substance of God. We're good to go. So, going forward, after Constantine dies, not all the future people who came into play were of the Christian faith. Some tried to bring back pagan religions, but it was way too late at this point, right? Christianity had woven itself into political structure, and the church had become a main staple of social and political control. So it was too late, right? It was a staple of society. And so then going forward, future emperors started suppressing pagan religions, quote unquote pagan religions, even persecuting them, calling them heresy or labeling as heresy. So Christianity becomes the official religion of the Roman Empire. And my whole thought with that is, right, who is making these decisions, right? And on what facts are they making those decisions? So I'm trying to be at the table while they're having this conversation, right? So they're saying, I don't think Jesus Christ is the same substance of God. And someone goes, no, how dare you? He is. I know it. And I'm like, so what proof do you have? And they're like, I had a dream. It's awesome. And I'm just like, okay, but you had a dream, but I didn't have a dream of that. He's like, no, it came to me. It was a divine vision. I'm sure of it. And it's like, well, okay, I'm going to kill you. He's like, I'm going to kill you if you don't believe it. And it's like, all right, yeah, I guess I believe it. I'll convert, right? Whatever, So it's hard for me to understand the conversations being had about who to suppress, who to convict, what thing to follow. And it's just interesting, right? Food for thought. why is it okay for someone to say what another person believes is right or wrong, right? And then outlaw it? I'm not sure. But anyway, what we do know is that Christianity endured, right? And that's why I was talking about the Egyptian religions, because Christianity is still around today and one of the most practiced religions in the world. But maybe because people could use their divine rights to rule and come to power. But that's no different than the Egyptians, right? I just would love to know why they died out the way they did. But anyway, that's all I got for you guys today. I've been off the book reviews and all these things for a minute. Been having a lot of fun bringing people on, but obviously gonna put out a lot of different things. So hope you guys are enjoying. Feel free to leave me any feedback, and remember, only positivity. Thanks, guys.